Hello everyone, it's Foo here with a very powerful video for you today. We're talking about the Pokemon equivalent of weapons of mass destruction, a cataclysmic, high power, high risk, normal type attack, Hyper Beam. You know I like talking about overlooked Pokemon, well here's an overlooked move. This iconic attack has insane damage potential, but requires that the user recharges its exhausted energy the following turn, leaving them open to attack, or potentially worse, allowing the opponent a completely free turn to set up for a revenge sweep. Despite this worrying flaw, a select handful of Pokemon are capable of wielding this immense power effectively. Today we'll be counting down the top 4 users of Hyper Beam and looking at how they mitigate its drawbacks in different ways to utilize one of the most devastating moves in the Pokemon universe. If you do enjoy this kind of video, then please consider leaving a like because it helps out my channel and also lets me know what you might want to see in the future, but if not, that's fine too. Before we get into this, it's worth noting that Hyper Beam hasn't always been such a risky attack. In Generation 1, it was really great because if you managed to net a KO on your opponent, then you didn't actually have to take that recharge turn the following turn. But that mechanic has now gone from the game, which I think is a bit of a shame because it's an interesting way to incentivize people to use Hyper Beam, despite it having this flaw that could actually be quite devastating if you don't take out your opponent. But let's get into the top 4 Pokemon. So first off, we're going to consider Pokemon with the E8 abilities. A few Pokemon have access to some really interesting and enviable abilities that change normal type attacks to their own typing, granting them same type attack bonus, which is basically a 50% damage bonus, as well as the ability giving them a 20% damage bonus itself. So that is really quite a lot of damage stacking up, and these abilities are very strong. Examples of the abilities are Refrigerate, Aerolate, and Pixelate. Combining Hyper Beam's already terrifying 150 base power with a 1.2 times damage boost from the ability and a stab boost on top of that, we're looking at some insane power. Not only that, but most of the Pokemon that gain access to these abilities are actually Mega Pokemon with incredibly high attacking stats to reinforce the damage further. Good examples are Mega Glalie, Mega Salamence, and the most powerful of them all, Mega Gardevoir. But even here, these Pokemon seldom use Hyper Beam in competitive battles because it comes with such a high risk, and obviously with your valuable Mega Pokemon you don't want to go for one attack and then have to recharge and actually lose your Mega Pokemon because of that recharge turn, especially when there are alternative attacks that are less risky but still very powerful. However, there is one metagame where Hyper Beam is almost the first choice of attack for such Pokemon, and that is the 1v1 metagame. You and your opponent have teams of 3 and you each select one Pokemon to go head to head, meaning battles are super fast, usually only lasting 1 or 2 turns. If you run Hyper Beam and you are able to one-hit KO your opponent with that Hyper Beam, you don't have to worry about the consequences of recharging the following turn because you've already won the battle. You've taken out the one Pokemon that they have. Hyper Beam Mega Gardevoir is a monster in this format and is just so satisfying to use. As long as you get the matchup right, you can watch your opponents melt before the powerful and almighty beam. You can play this 1v1 meta on the Pokemon Showdown Battling Simulator, and if you're interested in finding out more about the 1v1 meta and some of the cool sets and gimmicks you can use there, then I suggest checking out Elo Bandit's YouTube content. He's a really great creator that has some really interesting insights about this tier, so I'll link some videos in the comment section below. The next Pokemon I'm going to talk about are actually kind of cheaters because they don't use Hyper Beam itself, but they use it on their moveset as a basis for an extremely powerful Breakneck Blitz Z move. Hyper Beam's power is usually 150 base power with 90% accuracy, but when it's turned into Breakneck Blitz, it actually turns into a 200 base power move with 100% accuracy and no need to recharge the following turn, which is pretty darn strong. But why would you use this Z move as opposed to other coverage moves that may be super effective against a Pokemon that you're trying to attack? Well, this is actually really useful for Pokemon with limited coverage that just need neutral damage against some of the walls that might take them on. And the best example of this is Keldeo. Now Keldeo has that water fighting stab, which is actually really great. It has very good coverage, but it just is a shame that some of the best special walls in the game can take these moves for days, and those are Toxapex and Mantine, just to name a couple. There are a couple more. But with Calm Mind set up and this normal type move which has neutral coverage against Toxapex and Mantine, Keldeo can actually blow these Pokemon the hell back. If you get some Calm Minds up and you have this very powerful Z move Nuke, you can really take them on and then break those walls that you need to. So Keldeo isn't really using Hyper Beam, it's a little bit of a cheater, but if you have already burned your Z move, you've used your Breakneck Blitz, yet you still need that normal type coverage, then Hyper Beam is always on your moveset, so you can actually click that normal Hyper Beam, take the recharge turn if you want to. And so it could lead to some interesting battle options there. Another user of this strategy is Quiverdance Lilligant in lower Smogon tiers. Between this and its access to Sleep Powder, it can be really hard to check. But for sure, the premier user of this strategy is Keldeo, definitely one of the best users of Hyper Beam on its moveset. So we've talked about the Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon metagames, but there is another metagame this generation in which Hyper Beam has had a mini revival, and that is Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu. It's worth pointing out here that the animation and sound effect for this move is pretty darn glorious in Pokemon Let's Go, and it's definitely an incentive to try to use this move. There aren't too many powerful normal type special attackers that get Stab Hyper Beam in Pokemon Let's Go, but one that does stand out is Mega Pidgeot. It's generally viewed as a mediocre Mega in Let's Go, but Mega Pidgeot's speed tier is actually really good. And though it doesn't have access to its accurate Hurricanes like it does in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, because Hurricane doesn't exist in Let's Go, its air slashes are still pretty powerful and can obviously flinch the opponent, and it does get nice coverage in Heat Wave. However, it still struggles with a very powerful Pokemon in the format, and that is Zapdos. Zapdos is one of the biggest threats. It's very strong, it's got great bulk, it's got recovery and roost, and it's just a pain to take down, and a lot of Pokemon struggle with it. If Zapdos has taken some chip, either by taking an Air Slash or by switching in on Stealth Rock, or just taking some prior damage, Mega Pidgeot's Hyper Beam can then finish it off. And taking out Zapdos may be the key to your victory. It may then allow one of your other Pokemon to come in and clean up the rest of the opponent's team. So Mega Pidgeot turns into a breaker of one of the most potent walls in the Let's Go meta. And really, it's just a great way to use an underused Mega, as well as using an underused move in Hyper Beam and seeing that glorious animation. If you want to see more Mega Pidgeot Hyper Beam action, then definitely check out PokeAim's video linked in the description below. PokeAim is one of the best Pokemon competitive YouTubers out there, and he does some great Let's Go content. So the last Pokemon that we're going to be talking about today is the Pokemon that actually has the most powerful Hyper Beam of them all in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and that is Paragon Z. It has an incredible special attack stat of 135. It has the adaptability ability, which boosts its Hyper Beam stab bonus from 1.5 times damage to 2 times damage. And it's also able to hold the Choice Specs item, which is notable because a lot of the other most powerful Hyper Beam users are actually Megas, which can't hold any items at all. So this being able to hold the Choice Specs on top of all that equates to an insane Hyper Beam that can OHKO even Pokemon that resist it. This thing is just so powerful. Not only is it the most powerful Hyper Beam in the game, it's one of the most powerful moves full stop in the game. It is insane. So how can you use this power? Well, you can use it however you want, even if it's just using a Choice Specs Paragon Z in a normal battle, trying to get a guaranteed powerful Hyper Beam KO, you can do that. You might be throwing away your Paragon Z in the process though with that recharge turn, but if you're happy just getting your KO, that's fine. It's notably very good in the 1v1 meta that we've already talked about. If you give it a Choice Scarf, it will outspeed the majority of Pokemon and obliterate a huge swathe of the tier. But where it was used most interestingly and notably, in my opinion, was in the restrictive VGC 2017 meta, where not too many Pokemon were actually available. In the early metagame, Z conversion Paragon Z had seen quite a lot of use, and this doesn't run Hyper Beam. What Z conversion does is it boosts all of Paragon Z's stats by one stage, giving it insane stats. It becomes really bulky, really strong, and very fast, and turns into a type of your choosing depending on what moves you give it. This is a huge threat, really able to decimate teams, and it forces your opponent to play in a specific way. They have to be really aggressive, try to double target the Paragon Z and take it out before it gets this setup, otherwise they're in for a lot of trouble. So to profit off that, a team was created and then popularized by Sage and Park, one of the world champions VGC players, and it featured a Choice Scarf Hyper Beam Paragon Z. Now the opponent, seeing a Paragon Z, expect it to have Z conversion, and they think that they need to double target it, so they will use all their Pokemon to go for attacks against it to prevent it from getting that Z conversion off. But your Paragon Z then outspeeds the opponent because of that Choice Scarf, and with its unbelievably powerful Hyper Beam, it will OHKO one of your opponent's Pokemon on the first turn, giving you a turn 1 4-3 lead, which is invaluable. But what I think is really interesting about this Paragon Z set is that this set does not try to avoid taking the recharge turn. It actually uses the recharge turn to put more pressure on the opponent, because the opponent then fears that they have to take out this Paragon Z before it gets another chance to use Hyper Beam and take out another one of your Pokemon, and therefore they're still trying to target that Paragon Z slot, while your other Pokemon can be dealing damage to your opponent's team, it can be setting up, it can be doing whatever. So in this doubles format, that recharge turn can actually be used to your advantage to allow you to, strategize and use your other Pokemon to its full advantage. So I think that that is actually an amazing way to use Hyper Beam, and that is why I think Paragon Z is the best Hyper Beam user of them all. It's not only the most powerful, but it uses the recharge turn, which is meant to be a flaw, but it turns it to your advantage, and I just think that that's way too cool. So for me, Paragon Z is the king of Hyper Beam and the best user of this ultimate weapon. So that is that. 4 different ways to use Hyper Beam in Generation 7. Whether it's with one of the E8 abilities, whether it's using it for the basis of a powerful Breakneck Blitz Z move, whether it's using it in Let's Go with Mega Pidgeot or whatever other Pokemon you want to try, or whether it's using Paragon Z's incredible nuke. Please let me know if you've tried any of these sets, or if you have any of your own Hyper Beam sets that you like to use in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like, because it does let me know what you guys want to see more of in the future. But all that's left to be said is that I've been foofootoo, you've been awesome, and hopefully see you next time. Goodbye!